Hi everyone, and welcome to flm204 here at Effects PhD. Wrapping up the term and going to have some fun today with expressions, and then a really quick look at some batch scripting things, some ideas of things you might be able to do when you're working in batch, because we had a question in the forums regarding that. But I thought it would be fun to kind of walk through and just, go through a power review of some cool expressions I did. I know that some of you who might have taken expressions class in the past, these might be familiar, but I got some changes also, some things especially in the counter and the odometer that actually make things easier using some stuff we talked about earlier. For instance, we're going to go ahead and we're not going to explain this, but actually just talk about this odometer setup that I have here. And you can see what's kind of cool about it is how the things kind of rest and then change. I'm going to include the setup file in the class this week for you to check out. We're going to tackle one here in the class a little bit easier. Again, this took quite a bit of time to set up. The idea is once you get it set up, you don't really have to worry about it anymore. It's done and golden. We're going to take a look at this real quickly. This is just an open that I did ways ago for ESPN. And the reason I want to mention it is because it deals a lot with blending modes and so forth. And in batch, you can do a ton of stuff with blending modes, but we always get into these gotchas in action where transparency is not supported for various surface types and so forth. So I thought I'd go through some expressions that are really cool about how to get around some of those limitations and talk about those. So let's go ahead and just start out. And we've got a whole bunch of more stuff as well. So I think I'm just going to go ahead and dive in. Let's go ahead and take a look at the counter animation as a way to start. So let's go ahead and go into action. And let's just go ahead, and I'm going to go ahead and reset all. But actually, let me just show you what I've got going on here. I've basically got a bunch of layers here. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. It's actually number edit. And see, and I'll see if I can find that. There it is. This is the clip that I have. So it's counting from 0 to 9. And what I've got is a count axis here. And by changing this count axis, you can see this axis 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2. If I change it to 1, 5, 6, 2, 3, 8, 2, 3, 5, excuse me, it changes and so forth. So again, this is a great way. This kind of developed, someone sent this in as a way, kind of at our first FX Guide Live, I think, as a way to do a counter animation for, say, a game thing. And of course, in After Effects, this is really easy, but you can set this up here and again, be really flexible and use it over and over again. So let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and reset all. And let's go ahead and load in this number edit here. And of course, if you have, keep holding down Control, you'll stay out here. So you can go ahead and do 5 layers for this. I've got 6, so let's just go ahead and do 5 because it'll be a little easier. And so here are our 5 axes. And I'll just go ahead and delete the rest of these so they're not confusing to me. And the first thing, of course, you want to go ahead and position these. And since this is an expressions class, let's go ahead and I'll move this like this. But what I want to do is go ahead and apply that position. So we'll just axis 2 dot position. Let me go ahead and rename this actually now. Let's say num space. And so if my axis 1 position, I want to move this number over here. Basically, it's going to be 2 times this value. So we'll go ahead and enter in this num space dot position dot x times 2. And so you can see, again, why am I doing this? Because let's say I want to put in a different font or I want to do something different. This would be a really easy way to modify. All I have to do this. I don't need to recurrent everything. This is centered at 0, so we'll go ahead and leave that in position. That's our center point. This one, axis 4, we'll take this, right bracket, up, down, and we'll take it to a negative number space. Oh. I hit 1 there, minus. Okay, so now you can see that it's just putting in the negative value. And then for this one, axis 5, it'll just be negative times 2. So position times 2. And now we've got our spacing. And again, it took a really fast to set this up, and now I've got some real flexibility in if I want to change the font style or size, I can use this over and over and over again. So that's pretty good. Let's go ahead and save this. So I've got that there. If we get a crash of some kind, then I'm just always going to do this. Let's go ahead and add an axis for counter. And then let's just enter a value here of something we want to kind of play with. Let's go ahead and just enter a number of 47362. And let's start figuring out the math. Basically what I would need to do is I'd end up needing to have this adjusted so that my slip here on number 5, which is my zeros here, I'd want this to be at 2. And so forth. Here we'd of course want to be 6. And so forth. So what we need to do is we need to use the flame to slip function. Before I begin, let's go ahead and close these up. And to make things easier on us, what I'll do is in the media layers, we'll just each take the slip and we'll copy the main slip here and link it to the mat slip. So then I can just go into each of these layers, copy, link, and all I need to do is change the front slip and everything else will follow along, right? Make things really easy for us when we're entering. We don't need to double enter expressions. So I'm just copying, and you can see the expression that comes in here. It's just a slip of that layer. And copy and link. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the math of what we need to do. And in previous class, I have to say, I took it a little too far. I had the complex math way more complex than what I want to do. So in this course, what I want to talk about is using that mod function. We talked about that remainder function. So let's go ahead into Paint, and we'll just talk about this. Remember, what we had for our number is 47362. So what we need to do is we need to find a way to isolate in on each of these numbers, okay? And then turn those into a flame to slip value. So let's start out here with 47362. What I can easily do to get the remainder for this digit is divide it by 10. So let's go ahead and do that. So if we do 10 into 47362, you actually end up getting 4736.2. Okay, so that's our remainder of 2. Now in this clip, let's go ahead and take a look at this clip here. The way I've got it set up is 0 starting out. Okay, so if I were just to say frame to slip, put it on frame 2, we'd end up with the 1. So what I'm going to say is take that and add a 1 to it. So let's go ahead and take a look at what I've got here. So here's our starting number. We've got mod of axis1.position.x. In our case, that's count.position.x, comma 10. So basically, you're dividing this by 10, like that. You end up getting this 4736.2, which then a mod value of that returns 2. And then what we end up with is a frame to slip like this. So basically, we get this expression here that I put, okay, and then there's that plus 1 that we talked about when wanting to get that back on the correct slip. So that's a really good way. Dividing by 10 is really a good way of getting that singles digit back to where we want it. So the next thing we need to do now, let's talk about getting the 6. It's not going to be quite as easy, but what I can do is I can multiply this number times 0.1, and so I end up getting, effectively, if you think about it, 4736.2. And then I could just, in theory, apply that same function of what we did to get this number 6 out, all right? So again, we've got axis1.position.x times 0.1, so then we end up with this, and we divide that by 10. So you get this, we'll step through it. So you get 473.62, and so the remainder of this actually ends up being 6.2. Now that's not going to work, because what we need to do is we need to have this as whole numbers. When this gets to 6.5, we can't have the slip going up to 7 for rounding error. So what we need to do is get the integer value of that. So we'll use the built-in function truncate, which actually just truncates the number, giving you just this value. So we get 6 like that. So our frame to slip becomes this plus the 1. All right? So that's what we end up with. And again, I'll send out a PDF of this with a class for you guys. And then we just work our way up to, say, the hundreds digit and follow the same thing here to the hundreds digit, and so on with the thousands. You just keep adding a dot 0 to that as you work your way up in order to move that decimal point over and over to do this. And this function is a lot easier than the one I showed in the first expressions class. Much simpler actually, and it will actually help with the odometer solve as well for you guys, and you have to take a look at that. I'll actually send out the odometer in the old version because I actually haven't rebuilt that one myself. All right, so let's go ahead and go back into action, and we'll just really quickly enter these values in for the first couple ones here so that we know that it's working out okay for us. Come down here, go to animation, media 5 layer slip here. We'll go ahead and do is enter that in as, oh, not the matte slip there. I don't want to do that. I want to do that here on the main slip. What I want to go ahead and do is say frame to slip. Of count dot counter dot position dot x comma 10. Oh, sorry, comma 10. And again, I like putting a little extra space in when I'm writing these. It helps me kind of remember how many parentheses I've got going. And so we go frame to slip this plus 1 parentheses. And there we've got. So if I take the counter up here, you can see that my last digit is correct. So we'll go ahead and just do the 2 more. Show you how this is done. So what we want to do for the tens digit is take this and say times 0.1. And for this one, times 0.01. And we'll go ahead and finish this off. Okay, so again, you can see how easy it is once you figure out that first one, how easy it is to kind of apply it to the ones after it. Makes it really quite simple. And again, like I say, these kind of things right here, well, that's not quite right. So I've got 5, 6, 4, 7, 5. So if you look at that, actually, you know what? I know what the reason is for that. What I did is I left off the truncate. So see, this is what I was talking about. It's actually a great demonstration of why. See, I got 6.5. So instead of staying on 6, where media layer 4 is, I actually swapped it up to 7. So what I neglected to do, and again, this is the other reason why I like having the spaces. I can go truncate. And again, it just helps kind of separate these things out visually for me. So there we go. So that's much better there. Again, a really good example of why I didn't really intend to do it that way, but a really good example of how useful the truncate function is and why it's a bad idea if you didn't use it. Really helps in this case because you don't want it. You certainly don't want it rounding up in our case because we're doing a counter. There we go. So that should be much better. We'll go ahead and take this and do 98765, 98765, and we're good to go. So that's a look at the counter. That's really a fairly straightforward example. And again, this theory of the way I made it, having these numbers separated so that if you wanted to say, current or you had a different font or have it been tighter, you can actually do that and really effectively. Expressions make your life easier. I guess that's the thing I'm trying to sell here to y'all. So let's take a really quick look at the odometer, and I'm going to include this in the class, and these functions that I've got here are really kind of whacked out compared to what I had. But let's just talk really quickly what I have. Basically, I have a count here. But again, in my goal of making this as easy as possible to modify, basically what I've done is I've got this spacing so that we can actually space these axes out and all the lines and so forth follow. Again, my idea was to build this once. You could have someone in 3D build this for you if you wanted, but this is going to be built once. I can change the font and I can re-render if I need to. The key is flexibility. So what I've got is I've actually just got this spacer group has a bunch of calculations in it. If I ungroup it, you can see that I've got the vertical spacer lines in there. So go ahead and just group that back. This is a front source. So if we hit F5, or I'm sorry, F6, this is basically what's happening. We have this vertical line here of numbers. And as I change the count axis, you can see what's happening is I've just got the numbers moving vertically in space depending upon this value. And actually I want to point out too, the spacer value actually also includes vertical spacing as well. And again, I'm going to include this setup for you so you guys have an odometer add to your toolbox. I don't expect you to really build this again. And so then I've got just all these numbers. You know, these are the numbers that I've got laid out vertically here. Look how nicely arranged they are. Never would do this if I was actually working on a job. The scale here, just to scale all the digits together, I'll just have that set up that way. So we'll go ahead and leave it that way. And then here are instances where this is our digits column here. The y value, all these values are actually expressions. And if you take a look here at the end, let's see if I can see this actually. To frame. Let's take a look at the position here. That's not bad. X position, really easily. We're just using that trick that I showed you earlier. Y position, not so much. Basically, this is what we have. I'm using truncate, I'm using positions, and I'm using if-then statements. Why am I using if-then statements? Well, that's because what I've got set up here in the counter, let's go ahead and go back to my result view. It's meant to be like an odometer. So if you move this, notice how the 4 and the 5 won't change, okay? But as you bring up this value, you can see that, I'm just going to increment this. Let's just increment this very slightly. You can see that in between the 9 and the 0, the two kind of roll together just like an odometer. So I have this if-then statement that leaves it locked in position unless the value to the right is between 9 and 0, and then you transition between the two. So it'll be interesting for you guys to take a look at that. I spent a whole class on this last time. I don't want to do that because I know a lot of you have been through this before. But check this out and see if you can figure out the way to make this much simpler than what I had before. Let's go ahead and talk about some blending mode expressions. And again, this clip here, I've got a lot of different blending modes going on, and while I do a lot of those in batch with logic ops, I kind of like the integration in action, but of course you run into those problems where you have the dreaded problems you can't actually have transparency on various nodes. But there's some really quick turnaround on some of the blending modes within action, so let's go ahead and take a look at that. I'm going to go ahead and add in this logo here, and if we add that image, one of the first ones, let's go ahead and take the image and just go ahead and switch to, say, spotlight mode. Actually, spotlight blend. This is a better way to start. If you take a look at this, you have problems because if I take the transparency, there's no transparency that I can do with it. And of course, at 100 then, it just absolutely does nothing. So you get 0, 100, nothing changes as far as our transparency. But it's actually quite actually simple to do. All you have to do is actually worry about the diffuse value. So if you take this diffuse value and I bring this down, look at what happens. I'm actually fading it in and out using diffuse value. Now you can go ahead and use diffuse value. I find that just a bit cumbersome when I'm working. I like to kind of do things in a sensible way whenever possible. So what I like doing is going ahead and use an expression. Go ahead and delete this. We take this and we'll go ahead and say copy. We'll take the transparency and we'll go to material, diffuse. We'll go ahead and say link. But what we'll do is we'll do 100 minus transparency. And then we'll just go ahead and copy this and link it to G and B. So again, all you have to do is change 1 if it doesn't work. And so now my transparency value is linked to my diffuse, and you're able to fade things in and out. So that actually works really well. That will work for spotlight blend mode. It will actually work with subtract. We get to fade in and out there with subtract. It actually works with negate. Not so nice in this point. But also add. So you get transparency with add. And again, I like thinking of transparency as handling my transparency, and that's kind of why I link things that way. Now, you can do the same thing with some other modes as well, but what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to do that in batch. And I'm working in batch a lot, so it's not that big a deal, but sometimes I find this way of working quite a bit easier. So let's go ahead and head into batch, and I'll Alt-Enter, and let's see, let's just bring this clip in, and this one, and that one, and then these two, which I'm going to need to demonstrate. All right, so I've got all my clips here. And let's go ahead and we'll go ahead and do our regular action that we had before. Let's go ahead and bring this in here, hook these people up. Let's go ahead and add. You know, that double click sometimes works to your benefit, sometimes not. Let's go ahead here and we'll go ahead and add this and take that as the front and that as the mat. And just since bear with me because I can't stand green. Okay. So now let's go ahead and add this image back in. We got this set up, and let's go ahead and use our favorite mode that I use actually for that spotlight mode actually. And I really like that. Again, you get running the same transparency problem here, not having any bit of impact there. And then we're getting this background going through. And so one of the first things when you're kind of messing around and figuring this out, you want to, why is it doing this? You do some tests. So that's why I brought in this item here. We'll go ahead here, and I'm just going to go ahead and add that. I'm going to copy his, like that. Go ahead and add an image, and I will go ahead and hide this. And what this does is this allows me to kind of see what's going on here. And so what I'm going to do is I'll go ahead and do that. So what is going on? Basically, you saw that background dip. And that's because I've got a medium level gray. Okay, I've got this gray that there's nothing there. So it's transparent, okay, when there's gray. And then where it's white, it kind of burns in. And then when it's dark, you actually end up getting almost like a multiply effect. So in order to control transparency, we need to figure out a way that gets the image to be just middle gray the whole time. The other thing that you want to do is take a look at this logo. It's comped on black right now. What you want to do is go ahead and comp that on gray if you're going to go ahead and use Spotlight Blend mode. You'll see in a second when I just go through this kind of how I set that up. So let's go ahead and just do a quick composite. Fronto Bacco Matto. Go back into batch. And then I'll just go ahead and replace this like that. And actually I can take this like that. Okay, so now you can see if we go ahead and unhide this and delete this, you can see now that I've got a spotlight blend happening where my background's transparent. Now, of course, the problem is I'm not able to do any transparency. And the bad news is I'm not going to be able to do that directly within action. But the key to this is actually using color correct. So let's go ahead and show you what I mean here. Basically, if we take a look at the action result, or just even our result here, what we can do is, I'm going to turn off the mat actually. There we go. What we can do is actually I can get that to actually be a medium level gray if I want to. What I want to do is go ahead and adjust contrast. And you can see if I adjust contrast and bring this down to 0, it takes everything to that middle range and brings it in. If I go out to 100, it gets it back to the way I normally would do it. So you can kind of follow that same transparency trick using Spotlight. And there are a couple ways at which you can do this, I guess. There's, as they say, there's always more than one way to skin a cat in Flame. What we'll do is go ahead and bring in a layer, and you can do it all within the action setup here if we want. We're going to go ahead and take this, and we're going to go ahead and add a source node. All right, and so basically we're going to do a front source, and we're going to make it override, and it's going to be custom with our front and the front and the matte white. And then what we're going to do is we'll go ahead and add this gray right on top of this. Okay, and now if you take a look at this, you can see that just by changing my transparency on this, I can go ahead and get that transparent. But again, you don't really want to use, this transparency. Basically, you want this transparency to work with us. So what we'll do is I'll go ahead and copy this. Basically, if it's 100% transparent, we'd want it to disappear. So I kind of want it to be opposite. So what I'll go ahead and do here is I'll go ahead and say copy. Go ahead and select this. Go here to transparency. And actually, I'll just go ahead and type it in. We'll say image1.transparency. So it's actually going to be 100 minus image1.transparency. Oh, sorry, 100. I want the image 3 here. There we go. I was on the wrong one. Let's go ahead here. So now you can see that I've got my transparency linked. You could also, if you wanted to, since we're in batch, we could actually link that to a color correct node upstream, because again, we have the ability to access in a batch universal channel editor, link a color correct or link an expression in action into an expression here. So what we could do is just go ahead and bring in a color correct. Go ahead and take that like that. And basically, so what we could do here is we could come and let's go ahead and do this because I want to show you the nomenclature for it. Our parent here is image 1. I can get rid of that. This might be more effective if you've got a big, huge action setup because you'd have all those source nodes. You're actually doing a complete action setup each and every frame. What we can do here is say we want to say copy. And then we'll go into color correct node and we'll go into master and contrast and we'll hit link. And what we'll do is 100 minus transparency. Let's go there. And so you can see if I take this up to 100, I'm actually fading that out because what I'm ending up feeding it here in action is a gray screen. And we can go ahead and see that here. If I leave that like that, take this down. I go ahead and take this transparency down like that, you can actually see this item fading in there. And all that's happening is actually a grade. All right, so that's a really good way of doing that. Okay, let's talk about another mode while I've got it set up this way. We can actually do the same thing with the screen mode on this. So let's go ahead and switch this to screen. Well, not exactly the same thing. As you know, the transparency is not going to work. What we're going to want to do here is come back to also our original. So we want this on black. So bring this here. And again, you can see that transparency not really working the way, especially since we got this color correct node. So what we want to do is instead of adjusting the contrast, what we want to do is go ahead and adjust the gain using that same function. So let's go ahead and take this. We'll say copy, and we go ahead and reset this channel. And then I'm just going to paste here in gain. So we're just going to bring down the gain. So as I bring the transparency of this down, go ahead here and switch over to the schematic. If I bring the transparency up, you can see that I'm just darkening the image that's feeding it, thereby making it transparent. Okay? So we can also have the same thing for multiplying. I'm not going to go through that. Let's go ahead and just take a look at that here in Keynote. Let's see if I can find that. Here we've got the functions for subtract, spotlight, blend, negate, and add. You can do these right in action setup. For spotlight, you've got color correct and contrast equal to 100 minus transparency. And again, that's a batch node. With screen, you've got color corrected gain equals 100 minus transparency. And for multiply, you've got color correct gain 100 minus transparency. And again, you could do these same things also with transparency within the same source node, but there is a performance hit sometimes if you're doing that with an action. The color correct nodes can actually process a lot faster, so you may want to approach it that way. So let's take a look at another cool expression use really quickly. Go ahead and load up my camera dad. And this was taught to me by Jake Parker, a good friend of mine and really awesome, incredible Flame artist. Basically, one of the cool things about Flame is 3D tracking, right? And 3D compositing environment. And you can do things, and this isn't the real one we did, but a quick example of this scene that we had to begin with, which is this. We got to running through. And it is actually ran a particle generator in 3D through this. And took advantage of using the 3D camera move, 3D camera tracking to position this particle stream. So let's go ahead and let me show you what I mean in action. This is the action setup. If we switch to the regular camera here, basically I've got this separated out into our various, you can see here, turn off the icons, turn on the back. You can see I've got mats here for the sign. Here's our particle stream which passes in front of the sign. It goes behind the sign, between the sign and the car, and then behind the car in front of the store. So it's really using 3D compositing for this. Now if you didn't have these planes positioned in 3D space, it would be kind of hard to mimic this. So let's go ahead and switch over to the camera view. I'll switch over to my witness camera, and you can actually see kind of what's happening. I'll go ahead and turn the icons back again. Turn the icons back again. I'm going to turn the background off because it's kind of hard to see. So again, now we're going to take a look. This is the camera that we're going to look at here, kind of off axis and watching what's going on within the scene. You can see now I've got the what is that sign, the car, and the building back here positioned in 3D space, and you can see that the camera move is just doing this dolly up, which is mimicking the camera in the scene. And then by having this image plane here, here, and here, I can pass the particle stream around it. So again, if we take this around, you can kind of see the setup of what I've got here, and it's kind of taking advantage of the 3D positioning in space. So what I'm doing is I'm actually taking these images and positioning them in 3D space, filling the raster with them, and then passing the particles through. But you need some expressions in order to do that. I've got expressions to figure out two things. I want to position this object in 3D space, yet have it still locked to the camera. And I also need to scale it so it actually fills the camera. And you just can't tell anything that's going on. It's for instance, this one layer is pushed way back in 3D space. Okay, but it's filled the screen. So, it just looks like a regular image plane. It's kind of a cheat. So as I push it back in Z, it scales it bigger. Well, let's go ahead and, take a look at this with the help of some crazy visual aids, if you would. So this is the setup that I've got here. I've got my camera position, and imagine I've got this track. Let's say this track is where the sign is, where the car is, or say, even where the building is. And then I want to have this image, which I'm going to kind of cut out. It's that car cutout. And I want to position it, though, at that track position in 3D space. And I need to have it also linked to the camera. So that as the camera moves, okay, my image is parented to the camera, but again, it remains fairly locked in 3D space, or that 3D position where that track is. And so what we need to do is we need to come up with some math for that. And luckily, I'm not going to go into this either, but Jake had some folks at the place he was working at the time who were far greater in math than either he or I were to come up with this. And so what we did is we figured what we would do is what we'd want to do is position the image. Let's go back into action. If we look at this, I've got the camera, and then I've got these items parented to the camera. So that way they're traveling with it. But then the scale, as you can see, the scale of these is adjusted as you, depending upon where they are in 3D space. So notice this is back in -514, so it's almost scales a lot greater. This one's not quite far back, so it's scale like that. And this one's getting closer to the camera, so scale's even smaller. Okay, so we've got some maths to deal with that. So this is the expression. So basically the axis, that position of that axis, the Z position, what we're going to use is we're going to use the tracker position that we saw in that graph. So again, we're referencing this tracker position, this camera position, and this axis position. You end up having the dot of camera interest minus the camera position minus all this. Again, I'll include this for you guys, and I'll also include the sample setup for you as well. Then we also need to take care of the scaling, and the scaling math actually becomes this, taking account into the position and then doing some math to figure out the camera field of view and what it would take to resize it with the image height divided by 200. Confusing? Yes, just a little bit. But again, this is just the kind of thing that maybe you have someone that you don't necessarily need to know the math to it, but maybe if you got someone, especially in 3D, who's really versed to this, or really not adverse, but really adept at this, and can help you out in figuring out the math for doing this. But it ends up being pretty cool. So let's go ahead and let me just try and do this. Let's go ahead and load my start and see if I don't botch this. Okay, so this is generally what you end up having. You end up having something like this. We've got, if you take a look at this, we'll go ahead and turn on, it's ground plane there. So you can see that's, it's a decent track. Things aren't quite on. You can see there's some play in this in the camera. But again, it's fairly forgiving in this case. Go ahead and turn this off so it's a little less confusing. And let's go ahead and figure out the position for the car. So I'll select this axis and just move it in X position to where I think the car is. So I think it's about there. Okay, so that's about the Z depth of where the car is. I'll go ahead and delete that first key there. Like that. All right. So I've got my 3 layers here. I'll go ahead and here's the car. I'll go ahead and add this in here. Oops. Add an image here. And you can see there's the car sitting there. So we first want to do is go ahead and parent it to the camera. And again, that is so it always will remain oriented to the camera. And now we need to figure out just basically adjust the position in space. So which axis is this? This is going to be track 15. So remember that. So come in here, and for axis 1, position Z, we'll go ahead and enter this big long expression. And no, I do not have this memorized. So we end up getting the dot product of camera.interest minus camera.position minus the length minus camera.position divided by the length of camera.interest minus camera.position, parentheses, and the final one. And instead of tracker position, I need to go ahead and enter in track 15. And now let's go ahead and let's just turn layer 2, take the front off, and see if we can see it. And so far we can't. That's because it's actually scaling too big. So now what we need to do is go ahead and adjust our scaling on that object. So go ahead here to Axis, Animation, take the scaling, and go ahead and enter that one in here. It's minus position.z times the 10, of course it is, of camera.fov divided by 2 divided by image height. And what that image height is in this case 486 divided by 200. And so that you can see the x works out y. So x works out well. So let's copy it to y. So copy this and link this here. And now you can see that, for the most part, I've got a decent match. It's a rough mat, but it works. But that image is actually positioned back in 3D space, okay, and not with the camera. So what's cool about this, actually, though, and I'll just show this here and how it works. If I move this tracker back, you can actually see, let's go ahead and shift up, go up to the top view. Okay, if I take this tracker back and I position it Z, you can actually see, if I turn on auto key, you can actually see how that moves. Okay, so if I go ahead and do this and position it like this, you can actually see that it's going forward and back in space and filling the whole camera view. So I think that's pretty cool, actually. Again, really thanks to Jake Parker for showing that, and it's a really useful technique, especially in smoke where you don't have projectors, where you can actually work a lot more effectively with positioning things in 3D space. In Flame, what you can do is you can actually just set a projector or a plane back there and project on it from the camera's position. You don't have to really worry about that. You don't have to worry about the scale and position, but in this case, this works out really well. So let's go ahead and take a look at that formula once again, from one position to another with our tracking point if we're going to position this in 3D space. And here are our functions for doing that. Again, there's a PDF file accompanying this class along with a setup file for this that I have so you guys can kind of follow along with it. Here's the one for image scaling as well. Hope this makes sense. If you have any questions about this, of course, feel free to drop by the forums and post those. I'd be happy to answer any questions about them. So last thing I want to do is go ahead and take a look at batch scripting and what that means. It can be really useful, but my God, I got to tell you, man, there's some pitfalls to it as well. So let me walk you through that. Let's just go ahead and I'll just say we're going to export this clip here. So let's go into batch, and I'll bring something back from the edit desk. And I don't even need to do anything in this case. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and set an output node here. And what this will do is, at this point, this is just going to output it to the reels. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach a script that I'm going to include for you guys. And I generally keep these in user discrete clips as list variables. And you'll see some of the problem, actually, with this. I'll just set this to 10 frames. What this will do is this just prints out a list of variables that are available to you. So we'll go ahead and hit process. and I'll switch over to my shell for Flint, and this is what you'll get. You'll get the batch node name, first frame, last frame, aspect ratio, frame rate, frame width, batch bit depth, so forth. And then you can see some of this is missing in this case. It does tell you the output destination being reals. If I go ahead and I switch this over to library, and we'll go ahead and just process that. Let's take a look at the difference here. You can see the output destination says library. Now, one idiosyncrasy that I want to show you that really, for lack of a better term, blows, is if I change this to my output, or my poutput. I guess that's appropriate, being a little pouty about this. But let's go ahead and hit process. Switch out here. Check it out. The batch node name is still output 3. It doesn't pick up the name of what you gave it. Okay, so that makes it problematic if you want to name stuff. I reported this bug, but not fixed. This stuff that we're doing here with batch scripting, I don't think is even in the manuals anymore. The last one I found it in was Flint 9. But if we go ahead and let's go into the library from here, you can see that it says my output here, but if I was to pass, let's say one of the things we want to do is I'm going to show you how to create a QuickTime movie and upload it to an FTP site. I want to be able to give it this name, but you can't. You have to stick with the name that the batch node has, okay? You can rename it in your script. So if I go ahead and bring this output node here, let's go ahead and switch this, and we'll go ahead and leave this into reals, process it. Oops, I need to just add the batch script to this. Let's go ahead and do the list variables script. I'll just set this to 10 frames, process it, and we'll go ahead and go here to the shell, and you can see that it says output 4 versus output 3. All right, so that's one gotcha that you got to be aware of. You're going to have to use your name, do your renaming in your script if you want to. The other thing is if we go ahead and change our type to an export, and we'll go ahead and do list variables here. I'll go ahead and change the name here to my export. Let's just say export me, just so it's a little confusing. We'll go ahead and go down to user transfer scripts, just for lack of a better place. So we've got that set up. Let's go ahead and set this to 10. I'll set the file type to, we'll go ahead and use DPX, and let's go ahead and hit process. And we'll take a look at the shell. You can see now here, at least you can get the file names that you need. It'll show you the batch directory. It'll give you DPX, the file format. There's no output destination here because it's either Reels library, they leave this blank. Okay, so just be aware of this. This is stuff that, this is an old script I have that I don't believe even ships with the software anymore. But again, you can get to this information by using this list variables. But let's go ahead and have some fun with this. Let's go ahead and show you the script that I'm going to use, which kind of gives you a hint of what you can do. The make movie script. Let's go ahead and I'll switch here to actually take a look at the movie. And basically what we end up doing is we end up being able to get certain information from the input that gets passed to the batch variable. Those variables they list get passed to this. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. We've got some sample movie file formats here, basically MPEG-4, you have V210. This is actually like that. Sorry, let's go ahead and save this. FFmpeg-4 is MPEG-4, V210, 2VY. You have various frame rates, crop types. What you want to do is set up some path locations and the library. You actually don't get the full library name on export, which is rough. So you need to have a separate kind of clip library for each frame in general. So we're going to set the clip library to be FXPHD flm204 default. The file destination, user transfer movies. That's where I'm going to put my resulting QuickTime movie. And then there's a mail script. I actually don't use this anymore because I couldn't get it to work. But you can do things like send it to an external script if you wanted to do that. I'm going to set my movie settings here. So using this information, I'm going to say set the compressor to FFmpeg, MPEG-4, fill, the move width and height, frame per second, spatial quality might be things you need. Scan rate is something you definitely need. And then I'm going to put FTP site settings because I'm going to actually send things to an FTP site. So that's the end of the configuration. All right. Just really quickly, let me go ahead and go back out here to the shell. And if I type move copy, which is the command I'm going to use later on, you can see that you actually end up getting the usage for this. So this tells you all the various options, the various export formats and things that you have available to you, cropping type, etc. Basically, it's a command line application that will take a movie from the frame store and create a QuickTime movie from it. Okay, so basically what I do here is basically I'm setting the source clip, which is the clip library, at the batch node name. So this batch node name is actually something that gets passed to us. In other words, in this case, even though we name this output, what we would do is we go ahead and do this. It'd be output 4. Okay, so what you would do is we'll set output 4 here. Come over here, set it to be library and default. And coming back here, this is the basically command that gets run. It's going to say run move copy, use the compressor that we defined up here, and basically I said use ffmpeg4 minus D. It's a scan format, and I said progressive, movie dimensions, the source clip, and then the destination movie. All right, so basically what it does, it just runs this command on the command line, and then it's actually going to send this file via FTP. So I've got my FTP information hard-coded in up here. So again, it's a fairly rudimentary script. Again, I'm working around some of the issues with some of the batch scripting and stuff that you get out of it. But again, it's using all this information that you've got here to run the command. And again, I've just got these two files in user discrete script. List variables and make movie, and it needs to say .bscript for it to find it. So just to make sure I don't have an output called output 4, I'm going to go ahead and just add one more here. It's called output 04. Go ahead and delete this. We'll go ahead and set this to be 1 to 10, library default, and let's load the script make movies. So what it should do is actually make a QuickTime MPEG movie or an MPEG movie and upload to an FTP site when it's done. I'll go ahead here and hit process. Let's go ahead and switch back to my Flint shell, and you can see here basically what happens here. There's our last thing right here. Basically it's putting all our files here. It's saying going ahead and loading up Stone and Wire, all this background process here. It's going to go ahead and convert the output movie. You can see that it puts it out here. There's nothing that says, and now it's going to connect to fxphd.com, log into our FTP server, and again, transfer complete. So it's going to transfer the file and so forth. So again, that's an example of using batch scripting. Again, the key is here to go ahead and let's go ahead and open up that variables script here. So what we're going to do is go ahead and edit list variables, and basically it's going to output all those variables that you can use in your script. The other key to remember actually is, let me go ahead and go back here to the shell we had. If you do move copy, basically whenever it's asking for the source file, in other words, a source file that you need to do versus a destination file, that is done by typing something like this: user discrete user discrete clip stonefs, the name of your project. So in my case, that'd be fxphd flm204, and then you would see a default or whatever library you had. So default and at, and then the clip name. So in other words, in our clip name, which would be output 04. And that's how the nomenclature goes when you're doing that. So basically that's what you need to do if you're going to run a command line. That's just basically how the script finds a clip in a given library. And if we go ahead and go back out here to the library, you'll go ahead and see here that I've got an output 4. The other thing to remember when you're doing this, check this out, it will actually create multiple instances and not overwrite your clip. Okay, so that can be problematic as well. Just yet another pitfall of using batch scripting. Again, it could be useful if you had a long script. You could have it, say email you that it's done or do something like that. But again, there are people using it and using it for success. I just end up, honestly, at times finding it more trouble and more bugs to work through and working around some of the stuff that's going on versus useful and just doing things manually. Well, that's it for flm204 here at FX PhD. I hope you've enjoyed this kind of extended length last class where we fit in a bunch of stuff. Be providing you guys with, again, setup files that I showed you, the keynote for some of the expressions, so you can have that as a PDF file, as well as those batch scripts. As always, if you have any questions or anything, feel free to drop by the forums. Until next time, thanks so much for being part of FX PhD. See ya.